The only podcast for the curious mind with the short attention span. That's how Mike Rowe describes his hit show, The Way I Heard It. Each episode tells a story you may not know about a famous person you probably do know. Well, that podcast is the inspiration behind Mike's brand new TV show, which premieres this weekend. Take a look.
TV host Mike Rowe is well known for doing dirty jobs, the name of his popular cable show. He later shifted to cleaner work in narration and his popular current show, Somebody's Gotta Do It. In 2016, Mike also launched the podcast The Way I Heard It, a show about true stories with a twist. Taking the stories from the microphone to the TV screen, Mike will soon host a new show based on the podcast.
Looking forward to it.
I think it's going to be great.
The story behind the story.
Well, joining us now from Orlando is Mike Rowe. Mike, welcome to the 700 Club.
Gordon, thanks for having me. One of us is overdressed. I apologize if it's not me.
They make me wear a tie, but maybe I'll go do a dirty job somewhere and I can dress down for you.
Careful what you wish for.
All right. Well, let's talk about The Way I Heard It. This is a podcast you've been doing since 2016. So how did you come up with the idea, and tell us about the format?
Well, to be honest with you, I stole it from the late, great Paul Harvey. He, as many of your viewers probably will recall, had a terrific radio show called The Rest of the Story. And in The Rest of the Story, he would tell these short mysteries, usually all about something you didn't know about somebody you did. So you were helpless to just sit there and wait until the end when Paul Harvey said, "And now you know the rest of the story." I just loved that growing up as a kid. You know, I can still remember it playing on the little transistor up in the woodpile when my dad and I used to split the logs, and it was just one of those voices and one of those formats that I always loved. And I don't know why exactly I started writing stories in that style, mostly I think to pass the time on airplanes. And then this podcast thing came along and I started posting those stories. And then a few million people started listening, so I kept writing them. And next thing you know, this guy named Matt Crouch comes along and says, "Hey, that would probably look good on TV." And I said, "Oh, I doubt it." And he said, "Well, let me show you something." Then he went off and did it anyway. And next thing you know, I'm sitting here in Orlando talking to you about a new show over on TBN based on my podcast, proving once again, you really just can't script this kind of thing.
Okay, so tell us about the story behind the story. We've got the teaser here. What exactly is the show going to do?
Well, what happens in a format like this is that you can't really promote it without giving away the reveal. But what you can do is answer a lot of questions about why you wrote about the subject you chose to write about, and what things you learned along the way that you didn't include. And frankly, what parts of the story did you embellish a little bit? And by embellish, of course, I just mean made up, because history is what it is. Nobody was really there to bear witness, and everybody heard it slightly differently. So the stories offer a huge opportunity to talk about why they were written, and of course, the story behind the story. It was Matt who expressed a real keen interest in talking to me about why I wrote these. And he was coming from a place where he thought that I was writing these intentional morality plays. And I wasn't really doing it on purpose, but I couldn't argue with him. There was always a theme in these stories that had something to do with the Bible, or some concepts that you would find in the Bible. And so we started to have a really good time talking about what he thought I meant when I wrote any of these stories, and me explaining to him what I thought I meant. And we wind up having a pretty good time, because it's a completely unstructured interview about a topic that a lot of people will be familiar with. But you get recreations in this show. You get a performance of sorts. I sit in an empty theater and read these stories straight to camera. It's Matt who then comes along with TBN's resources and gives them the Hollywood treatment, really brings them to life. And then we sit down and talk about it. And it's a very, very unique mix of styles. But in the end, I mean, I know I'm patting myself on the back, Gordon, but I have to say it's pretty good.
All right. Well, tell us your story behind the story. How did the stories of the Bible, or how the Bible influences people, how did that become important for you?
Well, I don't think that it certainly wasn't a conscious attempt to try and channel the older New Testament, but I do have a foundation that I run called MicroWorks. And the MicroWorks Foundation awards work ethic scholarships to kids primarily who can make a persuasive case for themselves. And we talk a lot about these scholarships in my foundation in terms of, we call it a sweat pledge. It's something everybody has to sign who applies for a scholarship. And it's ideas that typically revolve around delayed gratification and a positive attitude, work ethic, personal responsibility, all the things that I was fortunate enough to grow up with, but may have gravitated away a little bit here and there, So running a foundation and trying to lean into some of those themes as we celebrate work ethic, I think sort of leaked into the stories that I was writing. And so we hear stories about persistence and determination. We hear stories about people who just refused to quit, and some people who did. And so in the end, I think it's always about the story. But it was Matt who said, as you just asked, what's the story behind it? And the honest answer to that is a TV show I never thought I'd make. But here we are.
Well, give us a little sneak peek on the story behind the story. What's the story you're going to lead off with this Saturday?
Tricky question. I don't want to give it away, but I think we're going to hear a story about a man named Norman Lawson, whose determination to create a household product was second to none. He worked day in and day out, laboring in the little lab he built over his garage, much to the consternation of his wife and family, who he neglected in his zeal to perfect this thing. Gordon, you have this thing in your home. Matt has it in his home. I have it in my home. I don't know anybody who doesn't have it. But this is the story of how this thing came to life, how it changed millions of lives, and how poor Norman wasn't paid but $500 for his trouble.
Wow. Well, that is a story behind the story, and that's a good tease. That's a good promo. The story behind the story is going to premiere this Saturday evening, May 7th at 9 p.m. on TBN. And Mike, thanks for being with us, and every success on this new show.
Gordon, next time I see you, I'll be wearing a tie. I promise.
I look forward to it. All right. We'll be right back with more of the 700 Club right after this.